this Black History Month 2025. This is Donald Earl Collins, A Fool's Gold Confessions from an Educated Fool. And it is February, and even though the Trump administration tried to ban Black History Month and then said it was okay to have Black History Month, we don't do Black History Month because the president says so or doesn't. So because Black History Month, or before Negro History Week, which goes back to almost 100 years ago, 1926, didn't depend on who was the president of the United States, what party they were affiliated with, or whether they were an autocrat or not. So we're going to go through Black History Month anyway. My post on the postscript of the Civil Rights era, final postscript, is really about understanding how we got here. And I just want to explain a couple of things about this post and put the thinking behind it, so that you understand why I talk about what I talk about. We already know the history of the Republican Party and the conservative movement over the last 60, even 70, or even 80 years. We don't have a comprehensive history of the Democratic Party and Black folks' relationship with that party over the last 100 or so years. I mean, there are pockets of it, obviously. FDR here, LBJ and the Civil Rights Movement, JFK and the Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 60s there, and some stuff about Clinton, a little bit about Carter, a lot about Obama, but not a cohesive history that looks at the Democratic Party and its move, its pendulum swing from center right to centrist to slightly center left and way into the center right, almost to the Republican right over the course of the last, say, 100 years, especially the last 60. We don't have a comprehensive history. And, we could talk about scholars and theorists like Mike Davis, the late Mike Davis, or we could talk about folks, structuralists and post-structuralists like Data Scotchpole, and I could be all theoretical about it and shit, but the truth of the matter is that none of them fully deal with how Black folk have basically become the face of the Democratic Party regarding its progressivism, at least in rhetoric. But in reality, they are also the face of a center-right movement of that party since the days of LBJ, the Great Society and War and Poverty Program, Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so what I try to highlight in this piece is the fact that the Democratic Party that we think we've been voting for, or some of us think we've been voting for the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years, is no longer that party. It hasn't been that party for quite some time. And when I say quite some time, I'm thinking since Nixon came to office, this year I was born, 1969. When LBJ leaves the White House on January 20th, 1969 to inaugurate the new president, Richard Nixon, the Democratic Party is already in the process of shifting toward the right. They're losing their Southern Democratic bulwark, that wall of folks who would vote for the Democratic Party almost no matter what because they hated Republicans, until the Republicans became Southern Democrats during the 1960s, 70s, and 80s in a lot of ways. And with the evangelical movement, a lot more people moved to the right as well. So even when you're talking about the Democratic Party, a party that has maybe a slightly centrist to center-left wing of maybe a couple dozen Congress people and 4 senators max, right? You're talking about a party that is in a lot of ways still influenced by big money, just as much as the Republican Party is in some respects, that votes with the Republicans like 99% of the time on anything that involves defense, the Department of Defense, the military, policing, almost everything. So even though the rhetoric of the party might sound like what it sounds like, the reality is, in a lot of respects, it's not very different than the Newt Gingrich Republicans in the 1990s, the Robert Dole Republicans in the 1980s and 90s. I'm not saying that they're exactly the same. I want people who are going to support the Democratic Party no matter what to not put words in my mouth and say that they're exactly the same. That's not what I'm saying. But it is a well-orchestrated cast of we're in charge, and we're the opposition, and then it switches back and forth. And that's the reason why I have this Looney Tunes cartoon from the 1950s up here between Ralph Wolf and Sam Sheepdog. The series of, for those of you who did not grow up in a generation of folks who got desensitized to violence because we got constantly saw cartoon characters hitting each other upside the head with sledgehammers and mallets and rocks and blowing each other up in there. Looney Tunes had a lot of themes in it that weren't just about blowing things up. This is one of these more cynical themes about the relationship between predator and prey, and how really you got two predators here. One's guarding sheep, the other one wants to eat sheep, but in reality, in this case, the sheep are really secondary to this whole thing. And it comes off as the way sort of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have related to each other for decades. So I'm just going to play a little bit of this. Hello, Ralph. Hello, Fred. Hello, George. Hello, Sam. Hello, Ralph. Morning, Ralph. Morning, Sam. Morning, Ralph. Morning, Sam. And I'm going to stop it there because you get the point. They're punching the clock. Neither party responds to the average American people regarding anything. Genocide in Gaza, genocide in Sudan, genocide in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, violation of rights overseas, violations of rights here in the United States, from ICE to police brutality on black and brown and indigenous folk, to indigenous women and black women being missing, to transgender women being killed on a regular basis. They face more murder per capita than any other group of folks in the country, especially black transgender women, right? And we could go on and on around transphobia and anti-disability legislation and the DEI and all that. So bottom line is that we already know who the Republicans are. We already know who Trump is. We already know the kind of cruddy cronies and craven cronies he plans on hiring and has hired to basically hijack the government. But we can put as much blame on them as possible, but you can't not leave the Democratic role out, the role of basically looking like they're the opposition in some respects in front of us, in front of the camera, protesting, constant outrage and snark, as my wife would put it, and so on. But the reality is that behind the scenes, they're just punching the clock just like the Republicans are. They raise money off outrage. They raise tens and hundreds of millions of dollars for their campaigns based on outrage. But when they come to office, they're more or less espousing on probably 75% of the same policies that Republicans are. The only difference is rhetoric. The only differences are particular inflection points where there are some differences, but not enough to make a difference to the average American person. So, and they use black folk. They'll use a Kamala Harris or an Obama, Hakeem Jeffries. They'll use a James Clyburn, if you want to go back even further than that. They'll use a Warnock. They'll use all of these folks to basically say it's okay to keep funding the police. It's okay to keep spending $1 trillion a year on the Department of Defense. It's okay to starve social welfare programs so that they basically have the funding streams equivalent of what the population of the United States was in terms of poverty from maybe 20, 30, or 40 years ago. It's okay to let infrastructure fall apart and do basic maintenance on things that need to be completely replaced. It's okay to keep burning fossil fuels while we have something like clean energy maybe competing with it one administration and then shut down the next and then back to it the next. It's okay to have reproductive rights tossed around like it's a football or a frisbee in an ultimate frisbee tournament. Those are the kinds of things that the Democratic Party is perfectly okay with because they can raise money off of it, because their pockets are lined with people who are not aligned to actually see anything progressive come to pass in this country. So that's why I harp on it. Even though we're in the middle of basically a low-level coup taking place with Trump and the Republican Party and MAGAs and all of that. I also want to make a point because this is Black History Month, and because Black folk are more aligned with the Democratic Party than any other group. It's necessary to understand how we got here. It isn't because Black folk in general got us here. It's because Black folk were willing to rise in the party, help get us here. So that's the theming around why I picked this topic. For those of you who are benefiting from reading, listening, watching me talk about these kinds of things on Confessions from an Educated Fool, please donate. Please, $5 a month or $50 a year or $4 here, $4 there through buy me some coffee, buy a cup of coffee for me, get me a cuppa. That would be great. Thank you. And let's commemorate Black History Month by continuing to do the things that we need to do to stand up against the kinds of things that we all face, including yours truly. Take care.